A prison sentence is always appropriate for most serious offences. However, for other offences, a community sentence may be more appropriate. The Scottish Sentencing Council commissioned this podcast to hear what people with knowledge of the justice system had to say about the community sentences handed down in Scottish courts. This includes the Council's former victims expert and a former offender with experience of both prison and community sentencing. The views expressed are not necessarily those of the Council. We asked Sheriff Krista Johnston, who sits in the Sheriff Court in Forfar, for her views.
I'm Krista Johnston. My background is that I was a criminal defence lawyer for many years, and now my role is somewhat different. A judge decides a sentence by considering a lot of different factors. The first step always is to assess the seriousness of the offence by considering the culpability, the blameworthiness of the offender and the harm that was caused by the criminal act. And that will involve considering the victims. Sometimes it's not just an individual who's a victim, sometimes it's more than one person. Sometimes it's society as a whole, sometimes it's the environment. Of course, every crime is unique on its facts and circumstances. The more harm that a crime causes, the greater the sentence will be. A very serious crime that caused very great harm is almost inevitably going to be dealt with by a period of imprisonment.
When I received my community payback order, it was a kind of mixture of feelings. There was relief. And there was also the feeling of being given a chance to actually repent for your crimes out with the prison system. Yeah, a sense of relief. Getting a prison sentence, obviously that you're not getting to see your family, you're not getting to, you're going to be in with other criminals, things like that, and prison isn't a place that anybody wants to go.
We spoke to journalist Alan Richardson about his experience of reporting on crime and justice for the Courier and Evening Telegraph.
I'm Alan Richardson. I'm the team leader with the Crime and Courts team, which is for the Courier and Evening Telegraph outlets, which operate across Tayside and Fife. My opinions have changed during the time I've been in court. I've worked in and around the courts for nearly 25 years now. And as a young reporter, I would go into the courts and you would often question why somebody wasn't getting a prison sentence for a crime that they've committed. I was the same as many members of the public, that you wonder why prison isn't the best place for criminals, that it's sometimes as black and white as that in people's opinions. But as you spend time in the courts, you start to see people coming through with different problems. They've possibly committed crimes because of those problems. And often it's not incarceration they need, it's help, and having them in the community doing service for the community and also rehabilitating themselves in that manner. You can see that makes a difference. The same old faces start to not appear as often, and you start to realise as you spend more and more time in courts with the same people that actually prison and punishment isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all of appearing in court. There has to be an element of getting out of that cycle and getting the help that people need.
We asked Professor Fergus McNeill of Glasgow University for his views.
Okay. My name's Fergus McNeill. I'm Professor of Criminology and Social Work at the University of Glasgow. If I were to summarise the impacts of imprisonment, I think maybe the first word that comes to mind is disruptive. Obviously, when people go to prison, their key relationships are disrupted, their family relationships with partners or with children, with parents. Often their housing is disrupted, claims to public assistance like benefits are disrupted. Even registration with a GP can be disrupted. So people are disconnected and disintegrated from mainstream society. And that means that any sentence of imprisonment poses problems of reintegration. And quite often those problems lead to reoffending too. So the effects of imprisonment can often be very adverse indeed, both for the individual, for their family and for society.
Getting a community payback order, I knew that I was still going to be able to see my family. I've got children and that as well. So, and it was actually just before Christmas. I got my community payback order, so I knew that I was going to be able to see my children at Christmas. When I was sent to prison, it was only for a 6-month sentence, and I got put into Glenorchy jail. When I was sitting with people, it was doing 30 years for murder. So I think a lot of the time that's where a lot of the criminal activities coming from, because you might only be doing a small sentence, but you could be sitting with people that are doing big sentences and then they try pass stuff on to you and stuff. So I think if it's not a really serious crime, I don't think that people should be going to prison, because it's just going round in a big circle.
Short custodial sentences raise a number of problems in respect of rehabilitation. You might think that if they were just well-resourced and if programmes were made available in prisons from day one, and that if that was consistent across the system, then maybe those measures could work. But actually, again, the international evidence on this is quite clear. If you do a rehabilitation programme in prison, you have a challenge of taking that learning and moving it out into the community when you leave. Whereas if you do rehabilitative work in the community, you're already putting it into practice immediately. So the general evidence suggests that rehabilitative programmes of all sorts are more effective when they take place in the community than in custody.
Victimologist and former council member Sue Moody told us what she thinks about the use of community sentences from a victim's perspective.
Yeah. I'm Sue Moody. I've worked with victims and survivors of crime for more than 30 years, doing research, providing support services and campaigning on behalf of victims and survivors. I think community sentences provide a really useful option to sentencers for those who don't require to be kept away from the public for safety reasons, who are a small number anyway. They provide a great deal of different ways to focus on individuals and on why they've committed the offences and what is needed to make sure they don't offend again. Most victims would support interventions that stop people from committing crimes, and community sentences have been shown in research that they are effective. I've been a victim of crime, both violent crime and property crime. And what I wanted was that the person who harmed me was brought to account, but also that it didn't happen to me again and it didn't happen to anyone else. And therefore, those individuals who commit crime need to change their behaviour. And that's what community sentences are designed to help them to do.
I think community sentences can be profoundly challenging, and sometimes for some people more challenging than short sentences of imprisonment. If a person is so entrenched in the criminal justice system that going in and out of prison is a common experience, then eventually, maybe surprisingly to most people, that can become a normal and everyday part of life, a kind of hazard that has to be navigated. Whereas if you're placed on a community sentence, you are expected and required to do work to address your problems. And that can be extremely challenging for people who haven't yet attempted to do something about the problems that lie behind their offending behaviour.
Community-based sentences can often be much more effective in protecting the public for longer, because they address the root of the offending behaviour. It seems logical that if you can address the problem that led to the offending, then you can address the offending. And in my opinion, that is going to be much more likely to be achieved by a community sentence than by sending an offender into a custodial setting amongst other offenders for a period of time.
For me, I felt good doing it because I knew I'd been given a chance. I think the impact that it had on me was knowing that I was able to help people and thinking to myself, right, yeah, I've maybe done something stupid, but I've been given a chance to go and help people. But I think it depends on the person. If the person's not ready to maybe repent for their crimes and stuff, they're not going to gain anything out of it.
Community sentencing is sometimes not appropriate. It's not appropriate where it's perhaps been tried on numerous occasions and failed.
I got 120 hours community payback. Some days it would be cutting elderly people's grass, it would maybe be helping out painting schools, just general things that were needing done in the public. The supervision, it could be anything. If you suffer with alcohol issues, drug issues, anything like that, they're there to support you and put you in contact with addiction services, things like that.
Community sentences are complicated. Unlike prison, there's not a specific architecture that defines what that experience is going to be. A lot depends on the nature of the sentence, the types of conditions that are imposed, and also the kinds of relationships that the supervised person might have with a supervisor. But broadly speaking, I think it's important to stress that community sentences do involve a degree of suffering. There's invasion of privacy, there's restriction of liberty, and there's the demand or expectation that people do certain things in response to the conditions that they're placed under. All of that comes at a cost to the individual. But on the other hand, community sentences can be a real opportunity to address the issues that lie behind people's offending behaviour. And the benefit is that process of rehabilitation can take place without the disruption that's caused by imprisonment. So people can stay and work, they can stay with their families, and they can work on the positive aspects of their life that can give them an opportunity to move away from offending.
Well, quite often people think about unpaid work when they think about community sentences. But in fact, there's a very great deal that's available to a sentencer to impose on an individual that is not a prison sentence. There are community payback orders that can be imposed, and they can include a real variety of additional requirements. So, for example, a supervision requirement might be made under a community payback order. And what that means is that the individual who's on the order has to attend with a supervising officer who will work with that individual, who will attempt to change perhaps their attitudes in a domestic violence situation, perhaps educate them and change their views regarding the way in which they've been treating ex-partners, for example. There might be restriction of liberty in the form of an electronic monitoring tag. The sentencer will dictate, when putting the order in place, how long the order is to last for and the hours during which the offender has to be in their house. And there are treatment programmes. There are programmes to address drugs issues and alcohol addictions.
A very large proportion of people that go through the criminal justice system are offending because there's some relationship between drug and alcohol problems and offending behaviour. Sometimes that's to do with people committing crimes to raise money to buy drugs, or sometimes it's to do with people behaving in particular ways when they're intoxicated. It's unlikely that those behaviours are going to be addressed unless the drug problem's addressed. And so a judge might decide to impose a treatment condition so that those problems can be addressed, and so that the process of recovery from the substance use problem hopefully also helps move a person towards desistance from crime.
A criminal justice social work report might make a recommendation that an individual's placed on a drug treatment requirement or an alcohol treatment requirement. For example, an alcohol requirement would order the individual to attend meetings at an alcohol support group. So that kind of thing can be effective in assisting, along with the support that's available from community groups, can be of assistance in helping somebody move away from addiction.
And the earlier that people can access help to address those problems, the more likely it is that we can help them move beyond offending behaviour and beyond the criminal justice system too.
I think the media has a massive role to play in raising the awareness of community sentencing and any other sentencing disposal available that isn't prison, because we are the eyes and ears of the public in the courtrooms. That's why we do what we do. That's why we're given certain special privileges and we're allowed to be in there and to see and hear what's happening in the court. So we can come out, we can explain to the public what's been happening in the courtrooms. It's so vital that that public function is carried out.
Public opinion research on sentencing tends to show that when first asked the question, are judges too lenient, too severe or about right, most respondents answer that they're too lenient. The same respondents are then given information about specific cases, more detailed information about the offence, about the circumstances, about the background of the offender, about the consequences for the victim, and then they're asked to pass a sentence or to imagine a sentence that they might pass. And when they do so, the sentences that they pass tend to be similar to the sentences that real judges pass, or sometimes even more lenient than the sentences that real judges pass. And I think that public opinion researchers rightly point out that what this suggests is that there's a public misunderstanding of what's going on in courts. And that probably has something to do with the way that media reporting operates. Obviously, the media tend to report the most exceptional cases, which can produce a distorted public perception of what's going on in the system. There's one more subtle point to make, though, which is that when we're responding to offences that cause public anger or public fear, there's a widespread felt need for censure, to feel that the action has been censured, that something serious has happened which sends a strong message. And I think maybe the public don't understand how effective community sentences can be as a form of censure, as a way of communicating and engaging with the person about why their conduct has been unacceptable and about why it has to change.
Another aspect of our reporting style that's changed over the years that I've been involved in courts is there used to be an element of, if somebody wasn't sent to prison, the headline would become, X person dodges prison or X person walks free without punishment from court, because there's an element of the public think that that's what's happened. Unfortunately, those kind of headlines fuel that, even if a sentence has been given which includes an element of punishment, which of course community service has punishment in it. They're working for free out in the community. It's not, it's not nothing. So we've tried to stop using headlines such as escape punishment or walk free from court without being punished, because it's generally not true. The sheriffs who are making these decisions have thought long and hard about how best to fold in an element of punishment with an element of rehabilitation, and generally that will be community service, and therefore we try and now reflect that. We might say they avoided prison, because often a sheriff will say it's a direct alternative to prison, and I think avoided prison is fair enough. But to say they've walked free from court without punishment just because they've been given a curfew or a community service is incorrect, and I think it's just fueling an ignorance of what's actually happening in the sheriff courts. When we write court reports, we're very aware that there are real people involved on all sides, and we live amongst the people that we're reporting on. They're still within the community that we serve, and therefore we have to highlight exactly what they're doing. And if that's work in the community, if that's the projects that are being done in the community, then it is important for us to highlight that.
I think the perception that people walk free from court is a misperception based on a complete misunderstanding of what's involved in being subject to supervision. And if we used our imaginations just a little, we could see how big and obvious a misunderstanding that is. Most of us are supervised in many ways at different stages of our lives, either by our parents, at school, at university, in the workplace. And most of us don't find supervision an easy experience. When people are in authority over us and when they can control aspects of our fate, we find that difficult and uncomfortable. So imagine that the person in charge of you and supervising you can effectively bring you back to court and maybe put you in prison. Or imagine that they have the right and indeed are duty-bound to ask you intrusive questions about your personal life or about the reasons for certain behaviour that you've undertaken. Imagine that they're entitled to come into your family home, and that might mean contact with family members, which you would find shameful or embarrassing. Imagine that they had the right to speak to your employer in relation to the management of risks that you might be seen to pose. And perhaps most importantly, they leave you in a kind of limbo position where you are left wondering whether you're going to get to the end of this without breaching the order and finding yourself back in court and maybe in a worse situation. And that is no small thing to endure. So really, until you get to the last day and know that you've completed every requirement, you're not free, you're not finished.
I don't think that victims, or indeed the general public, are sufficiently aware of the programmes that can be very demanding and rigorous that are part of community sentencing. There are a whole variety of programmes, and they address the individual's particular issues. They need to be properly resourced, of course. It's also absolutely essential that the programmes are available for those who commit crime as part of their community sentence.
I think the fact that a lot of the portrayals of punishment in media is, prisons tend to be hard-hitting dramas, whereas community services might be good fodder for a sitcom or something like that. And really, that's not the case. Community service is a hard option as well, and it's only given because it's appropriate. It's always said that it's a direct alternative to prison. I think if we were able to tell some stories, show what people have actually had to go through while doing their community service, and put faces to those tales, and stop people thinking that it's an easy option, because we know it's not. And if people really sat back and thought about it, they would know it's not. They've seen people out doing their community service. It's not something they would want to do.
So I think improving public confidence in community sentences depends on public engagement, public education, public awareness, raising campaigns. And I would like to see greater opportunities for members of the public and members of the community to be directly engaged with community justice, to have some involvement in discussion around, for example, the kinds of unpaid work that might be carried out by people on community payback orders, but also to understand better the stories and the lives of people subject to supervision, so that they understand the background to their offending behaviour and the complexity of the struggle to move beyond it. So I think getting those stories out to the wider public in a variety of different forms would be an important way of changing public attitudes and improving the quality of public dialogue about punishment in general.
I think one way that we can improve public understanding is by focusing on individuals. Stop thinking of people just as a criminal set who go into court in the morning and come out at the end of the day with various disposals. It would be brilliant to be able to follow individual journeys from the court through their sentencing, and hopefully the rehabilitation at the end of that. It's so important to get personal stories and to see faces, put names to faces. Of course, it's very difficult to do that because people don't want to be in the public eye for that reason. But at the end of the day, a lot of these will be good news stories and people whose lives may otherwise have gone off the tracks, and they've been brought back round by the right sentencing by a sheriff or a judge. And it'd be great to be able to tell some of those stories, and I think the media would be more than happy. I know our outlets would be more than happy to tell those stories. We'd be delighted to.
I think it was last chance saloon for me. Maybe if I'd got to jail, I maybe wouldn't have tried to have changed it. It could have went either way, but maybe having that chance in the community to pay back that way. I've got a couple of children and stuff, so it gave me the chance to pay back without having to go to prison. But I think it has benefited me, especially along with the supervision and stuff. They put me in contact with addiction workers and stuff like that, and I have changed. I've not got into any more trouble since, and I'm still in contact with my addiction workers. With the Venture Trust, I'm actually on the participant panel and stuff like that now. So as where before I wouldn't even have bothered with stuff like that, as where now I'm trying to keep involved and keep myself motivated instead of maybe just sitting about, and that's where maybe the addictions come back or stuff like that. It's given me a better outlook.
In general, when we look at the reconviction rates for community sentences versus short prison sentences, in almost every study, in almost every country, there is a lower reconviction rate for community sentences than for short prison sentences. And the most rigorous studies where people are matched so that similar people who've got similar backgrounds, who've done similar things, are going to one of those two options, do show that community sentences outperform short custodial sentences in terms of reconviction.
The reconviction rates are the really telling thing about community sentences.
A community order imposed for 18 months or 2 years, with reviews, with encouragement, with addressing the addiction, with treatment for the addiction, with educating the individual about their how they're upsetting society, what harm they're causing to society, letting them see why what they're doing is wrong. It can provide the solution.
To find out more, you can visit us at scottishsentencingcouncil.org.uk or email us at sentencingcouncil@scottcourts.gov.uk.